Last night at around 6:05, we got a couple of clear indications about how Donald Trump plans to govern. That's when he released his 2.5-minute video on Twitter outlining what he wants to do in his first 100 days as president.
As part of this plan, I've asked my transition team to develop a list of executive actions we can take on day one to restore our laws and bring back our jobs. It's about time.
Specifically, Trump said he will withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade agreement he calls a disaster. He plans to eliminate restrictions on the production of shale energy and clean coal. And as part of his effort to, quote, drain the swamp, he wants to impose lobbying bans on executive branch officials after they leave the government.
These are just a few of the steps we will take to reform Washington and rebuild our middle class. I will provide more updates in the coming days.
The question is if more of these updates will only be coming over Twitter, a way of avoiding the press and speaking directly to the people. Trump is facing criticism that he hasn't held a news conference since July. It's actually not all that surprising when you consider his opinion of the press.
Terrible, horrible, unbelievable, illegitimate, disgusting, scum.
I'm not running against crooked Hillary. I'm running against the crooked media.
And that's just a small sampling of what he had to say. Today he wouldn't, then he did meet with editors and reporters from what he calls the failing New York Times. Yesterday he talked with, or at, depending on who you believe, executives and on-air people from all the major networks, calling out NBC for using unflattering pictures of him.
There's no need to mend fences. It was an off-the-record meeting. It was very cordial, very productive, genial, but it was also very candid and very honest. I mean, from my own perspective, it's great to hit the reset button.
You know, maybe the Trump team doesn't need to hit the reset button too hard. A CNN poll found that 53% of those asked think Trump will make a good president, and his favorability is now up to 47%. Here to talk about policy and presentation of Dan Primack, a former senior editor at Fortune. He won't tell us where he's going, but I hear it's good. Carly Carioli, I got it right for the first time ever, contributing editor at Politico magazine. Carly, it's good to see you, too. So the 100-day thing last night, did he stay true to his loyalists and stay unsettling to his critics, Dan?
Yes and no. I mean, he talked about executive actions. He didn't say anything about what he wants Congress to do, actual bills, which would be much more wide-reaching than a lot of the stuff he talked about. As for the loyalists, the big question for the loyalists is the thing he didn't say in the speech, but he said otherwise, which is that he's not going to direct DOJ to prosecute Hillary Clinton, something he's not supposed to do anyway. But that's clearly bothered some of the loyalists today. But yeah, TPP is a big deal. Coal is a big deal.
But for the loyalists who are sitting at home who are not saying, well, I want to parse this because certain things he can do by executive action, certain things he needs the legislation. When they're sitting home last night or this morning or whatever, no repeal of Obamacare, no wall. I mean, he didn't say he wasn't doing it, but it wasn't mentioned. Does that cause some discomfort?
Well, if you looked at Breitbart News this morning, there was a broken promises
That's the headline. We have it right here. Yeah.
So you have to wonder, at what point do these guys start to question whether or not Trump is really what he said he was during the primaries?
Well, you actually had in your magazine, you had a piece about people his supporters want him to deliver, and how much time are they going to give him? I didn't get to read the piece. How much time are they going to give him?
Well, who knows? But I think that they've shown over the course of the campaign that people often said that they took him. They took him not literally in exactly what he was saying, but they expect him to go to Washington and change things. And I think the question is, as he's hiring lobbyists, as he's saying that he's not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton, what is he going to do that shows them right off the bat that he means business about draining the swamp?
Well, by the way, TPP is a good example of that, right? Because TPP isn't current law. It's not something that's currently hurting jobs in America. So he's not going to sign that, fine. But he didn't then come out with the next piece, which is this. He said, I'll do bilateral trade agreements. He didn't say with who. He didn't give any examples of what those agreements would actually look like.
Yeah, but it seems to me that not only does that please his loyalists, many of whom in that so-called Rust Belt who voted for him because of his trade positions, it's got to please the Bernie Sanders voters, too, who a central theme of his, which ultimately was embraced by Hillary Clinton when she was for it before she was against it,
yep.
That he brings in a small element. They may not love Donald Trump, but they got to like that action, no?
They do. But, of course, the second thing ultimately, and look, we're talking longer term, he has to increase the job. We've had good job growth in the U.S. for years now, but he has to significantly increase it. He has to prove that not only can he kill TPP, he can create more jobs.
You know, this New York Times thing, while people like me were criticizing him this morning, saying, well, his campaign were the people who said Hillary Clinton hadn't had a press conference in 234 days. We were saying he hadn't had one since July. lie. I would argue going on the record in front of the New York Times when you can do follow-up questions as opposed to a press conference when you can pick and choose who you want is a pretty tough audience for a president-elect who is not really up to speed on all policy. Would you not agree with that?
No, I think it's important for him to do, but I also think that he poisoned the well this morning by saying he wasn't going to talk to them before he turns around.
Yeah, but did you read why, by the way? Purportedly, according to the New York Times, Reince Priebus lied to him. Apparently about the meeting, terms of the meeting being changed. He lied to his boss, the president-elect.
Which is just insane. I mean, it's completely insane. And we were talking about this, backstage. It might have seemed smart to Priebus to say that initially and try to game the system. But the fact that he comes out and tweets it is a disaster. Look, I think voters probably put this stuff on the side and they're more interested in what he's actually doing. And I think the press has to figure out how to balance its real battle with Trump on the freedom of the press with the other stuff that's going on that he's actually doing that is getting pushed off the front pages for this nonsense.
But do you notice that the CNNs and the New York Times are now sending reporters to all the places they didn't send reporters to during the campaign to atone for their sins, no?
Well, look, there was really great reporting that got overshadowed during the campaign. You can't say that people didn't send them.
Yeah, but the public editor of the New York Times eviscerated them for what they didn't cover after the election.
Absolutely, and everybody's got to do a better job of getting that stuff on the front page.
So let's talk again about the Clintonites or the anti-Trumpites for a moment. So in this New York Times thing today, I don't know if he reverses a position, but he was not going to buy into the Paris Climate Accord. They were in Marrakesh following that just recently. He now says he has a, quote, open mind. Mm-hmm. As Carly mentioned a minute ago, no longer going to prosecute Hillary Clinton. Of course, he doesn't have the power to prosecute Hillary Clinton. Theoretically, it's his Department of Justice. Should that be seen as a signal for a guy who maybe is trying to be more balanced in approach, even if some of his appointments upset people, or is that just aberrational?
Look, Paris is strange, right? Because he's called climate change a hoax over and over, and today he's opened up that not only does it exist, or potentially exist, that people
in the New York Times meeting,
in the New York Times meeting, that humans might contribute to it. Paris is a fascinating one. Yeah, look, it should not appease people, but make people feel perhaps not that he knows what he's going to do, but that he doesn't actually have a position. That what he said on the campaign trail about this isn't actually his position. He doesn't really have one, which could therefore open the possibility that he'll act in the way the Clinton folks would
just
like.
stay on the climate change thing, getting back to disappointing the loyalists. Even though polls show that a vast majority of Americans believe climate change has at least an element that is human made, it is sort of it's orthodoxy on the right that it is a hoax, that it is it's some left-wing notion, whether they agree with Trump that it's manufactured by China or whatever it is. It seems to me saying you have an open mind, which a fair-minded person would say, well, it's good, he wants to hear from both sides, is almost like a denial of the position that was central to the campaign, no?
Well, he's done this over and over again. I read that quote a little bit differently.
How so?
In the sense that he was, depending on who asked the question, it sounded like he was responding to whether or not he's going to pull out of existing agreements, right? So, and he's got an open mind about pulling out of the agreement. That's a classic.
You don't think it was an open mind on the agreement itself?
I think Trump is depending on what audience he's in front of and depending on who he talked to last, he gives a different answer.
Can we focus on the thing you touched on a minute ago about the press? One of the things, it seems to me that this obsession that we have had early on in this transition process about how rocky it was and what a mess it was and all these sort of things, number one is something that it's sort of a repeat. It's the campaign redux, meaning things that people don't care about at all. What they care about, who does he end up appointing and what does he end up doing? And secondly, it seemed to me to be wildly unfair in light of the fact people chose a guy who has no government experience. It's reasonable to believe if you have no government experience to being the most powerful person in the world, there's going to be some rockiness. Is that not a fair analysis of what the last 2 weeks have been?
I don't think people are criticizing the rockiness. I think
the press have chaos, inefficient.
And they should. They should.
Why?
Because he ran not just on being an outsider, but being somebody who really understands organization. I have built this massive organization. I can easily transport what I've done in the private sector and the public sector. If that's true, it should be fairly seamless. And the thing you pointed out earlier about Reince Priebus apparently lying to him earlier today.
That's what the New York Times is reporting.
If true, that's some serious dysfunction within a very small circle. And those are the first couple people he has brought in. That does signal there could be bigger problems down the road.
You're not in agreement with that?
I absolutely think so. And I also think that you have to underline the extraordinary, the way in which this departs from the way every administration has dealt with the press. So I think that's
people
part
like
of
Obama
the
had a
anxiety.
press conference after 3 days. That's what you're talking
People
about.
criticize Obama for press freedom issues as well. I mean, that's not a new thing.
Well, no, I would go further than that. There's civil libertarians like Harvey Silverglade, who says
Absolutely.
he's the worst on this issue in the history of the
And
presidency.
I don't necessarily disagree with Harvey, but in terms of like saying there's not going to be any protective pool, I mean that's what got everybody's hackles up.
Yeah, but at the end on what you, I think, touched on a couple of minutes ago, Carly, I don't think the average person cares at all. Not only do they have contempt for what we do for the most part, but even if they didn't, I want to know what he's going to do. I don't care how he gets there. I don't care whether he talks to you.
You're starting to see people come back at this, and I think the media is starting to learn. I'm glad it's happening before he actually gets in office. That they're going to have to counterbalance this thing, and that he's going to come out and tweet something outrageous every 10 minutes, and you're going to have to keep your eye on the ball and talk about the stuff that you're actually reporting. The conflict of interest stuff that's come out in the past couple of days is far more important to the way he's going to govern than the way he's doing with the press.
We only
right
have
now.
30 seconds left, but since you're a business guy and covered a lot of business stuff, do you think the average person cares about that? I mean, it's been detailed virtually nonstop for the last handful of days. But again, people voted for a guy who they knew had entanglements all over the world in the business world.
Had entanglements, was already, going to be going to court for a fraud case. Apparently, those who voted for him have dismissed it and didn't care one way or the other. So the fact that he has now settled the fraud case, the fact that he, now has this FEC fine, the fact that, his foundation has now been admitted that it had conflicts of interest and that it moved money the wrong way. I don't think his voters care. The question ultimately, though, is how many of these pile up, and at some point does the Paul Ryan wing of the Congress care?
Dan, nice to see you. Carly, pleasure.
Good to see you.
Well, gentlemen, good to see you both.